Welcome back, everyone, to Arsenal Pass. Today we have a special video for you, how to win your Uprising pre-release. I'm joined by the irreverent 6-0 world champion at the pre-release, Mr. Hayden Dale, and he's going to teach us some lessons.
First in the world, on that time zone scale, technically, along with 3 others at the Sydney event.
A lot of technicalities to a lot of things in life, Hayden.
Always.
All right, Hayden. So we're sitting down for our Uprising pre-release. We open our packs. What are we looking for initially? I'm just going to lead it off here, and I think it's the way I like to open, sealed packs in Flesh and Blood. I sort them in, generic. We go past generic, which could be draconic or ice, things like that, and then sort them into classes. And I'm really looking for density first. I want to see where sort of the density of cards in, which hero has the most cards available. That tends to at least steer my initial direction. Definitely doesn't make my choice, but that hero is definitely priority number one in terms of like, what am I going to be evaluating and what am I potentially playing here? I don't think that, depth it's not having the most cards, but if something has very few cards, that one might get ruled out pretty quickly because you might just not be able to make it work at all.
Yeah, I think there's certainly specific things in each of these 3 heroes, and the same with the last 3 heroes in Tales of Aria and the 4 before that are going to pull you into it. I know we're going to get to that soon, so I won't jump the gun, but in terms of, like you say, the first thing, just off the bat, so yeah, I'm the same as you. 3 hero piles, very clean, draconic, plus your generics, and then my equipment. And I actually, personally, I look at my equipment first, and that's definitely the first thing I did at the Uprising World Premiere. I think equipment is always very powerful. I think in this set in particular, you've got a lot of powerful equipment, and I want to be able to play 1 to 2 Quell. It's something I'm really looking for in my pre-release sort of pool. So I'm looking like, where am I starting there? And then, yeah, I'm with you. What's the biggest pile? So for me, at my World Premiere, I had like a really thick stack of Iyslander cards that I went to first, and then I'm starting to look within that at these key things that, we're going to get to.
Yeah, for sure. Just touching on that armor real quick because it does sort of sit outside, sits on a different level than the other cards that you get because it is a permanent. And there are some very, very powerful pieces you can get. They're not all created equal. For instance, the Sash of Sandiki, I think it is. Hard one to pronounce. Sandikai. That one definitely pulls me in a direction. Very, very powerful, and just like dominant, right? If you go for the Arcane Barrier Wizard Cloak, like that is also extremely good. It's good against Fai, it's good against Dromai, but it feels almost borderline necessary in the mirror. So armor density, having Quell is important too. Generally, you can find Quell at generic as well, but having some of those, more standout pieces, whether it is the Sash or it is the Wizard equipment, or maybe it's the Ice Helm that freezes a card in your opponent's arsenal. Those are going to be big, big pieces I'm looking for because they're permanents on the battlefield. They start there and you're definitely going to be able to use them during the game. All right, Hayden, getting past the generics, let's talk about what draws us to the individual classes. I think that Uprising is particularly interesting, specifically if we start off with Iyslander. So Iyslander is pretty easy, like level 0, to be like, I want good blues that can go my arsenal and trigger Iyslander's ability on my opponent's turn. Hit them for the wand for 3 and sort of grind them out. But I also want big reds. I want reds that are going to deal uninteractable arcane damage, etc., etc. I think there's a level, kind of a level 1 past that, where in Iyslander, I feel like there's a large divide between the good cards and then like the cards. So things like Aether Hail, things like Frostling, Aether Ice Vein, like these cards are super, super powerful. And I think they stand like a complete just tier above some of the other options like Succumb to Winter, Brain Freeze, etc., etc. Like I'm really looking for the good cards in Iyslander, definitely not density. Density doesn't draw me to Iyslander. I think that Iyslander on average, you can probably make something happen with not too much anyway because the weapon is so powerful and because it does deal arcane damage. But I'm looking for those standout reds and a good blue base, ideally and with ice, so I can fuse to sort of serve as the foundation for my deck.
Yeah, so at a pre-release, one of the things you can really do to get an advantage over all your opponents on day 1 of a new format is to take a look at your pile. So if we're looking at Iyslander to start with, that pile of cards, how will you win the game? We like to talk about it a lot, how you're going to win games. But at a pre-release, this is not really something people are necessarily thinking about. They may be thinking a little bit about it in terms of, well, I'm just going to deal a bunch of damage. And I think that's why we saw a lot of Fai at the World Premiere. It's the easiest of the 3 heroes to build, I think. It comes together nicely, and it has some really powerful kind of end-game and end-of-chain stuff with Rupture. But outside of just Fai, you need to look a little bit deeper with something like Iyslander, and it's not going to always be as obvious. So the weapon is really powerful, like you say, Brendan. You're looking for these like really key particular cards. I think Aether Ice Vein, that we talked about it in our set review, which has just gone up. That is one of the key cards that you can be playing in Iyslander. So there's a few, and even within that, even in Sealed, you still have kind of these semi like soft archetypes, right? Which is you can have things within Iyslander. I'm thinking about, okay, maybe I really want like a disruption package. this disruption package requires ice, ice fusion. So how many like ice cards do I have that I actually would play? Most of the ice cards you're going to be fine to play. Most of them are pretty good, right? So actually, what I'm going to look for immediately is like, how many ice cards do I have? How many ice blues do you said? So ice cards, number of blues in general, and decent blues that you actually want to play out of Arsenal, and then also some power cards that are going to either deal a lot of damage or do a lot of disruption. And ideally both, like an Aether Ice Vein. These are the things I'm looking to find, and I want a handful of these kind of reds you talked about. I want at least like five, maybe 4, 5, 6 good Iyslander reds that are going to be able to push damage and win me the game in conjunction with that weapon.
Absolutely. And speaking of Fai, probably going to be the most popular deck at your pre-release. If I'm looking to go into Fai, red density is important. Those reds, that they should kind of catch your eye a bit early. But for me, more importantly than that is going to be unconditional go again. If you draft a Fai deck with a bunch of good reds that doesn't have that go again, you can't build those chain links, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So I think that's pretty much the most important thing you're looking for initially. You can find that in generic as well. You can find some generics with unconditional go again, things like trade in, Scar for Scar, obviously conditional, but if you're planning to take damage, can be very, very good. But yeah, those things that resemble like head jab, leg tap, cards like that, unconditional go again, start off your chain, then boom, you're coming in with the sword for 3, and then you're finishing off with, maybe a Phoenix Flame, and then a card with Rupture, Breaking Point, Lava Spike, I think it is, not Lava Burst. That's really what draws me to Fai, is making sure I can have go again and build those combat chains.
I know you're a big fan of Lava Burst, and I think that card is a good way to finish the chain. So one of the things I think is really powerful about Fai and draws me to Fai is actually the weapon. I think the weapon is really good. And so if I'm starting and looking at my pile of Fai cards and my Draconic cards, what I'm looking for is, like you say, I'm looking for starters on the chain. So traditionally in like Welcome to Wraith, these are your head jabs, league taps. It looks a little bit different in Uprising. These are ones that naturally have go again, because anything you play on the second chain link, most of the Draconic cards are going to get go again in some way, shape, or form. Either they'll have natural go again, they'll be like the weapon and require 2 chain links or a Phoenix Flame to get that +1, and those are a lot easier to pull off. So I need something for the first chain link, and I'm looking for really about sort of like a quarter to a third of my deck being able to naturally have go again in order to start this. Like a quarter's on the low end, because if you think one per hand, right, you always need one to start these chains, unless you're, I don't know, maybe coming in with something like a Findle's Fighting Spirit red on one turn. But in general, you're going to want to go wide every single turn, utilize Phoenix Flames. Make sure you're always playing 3 Phoenix Flames would be the advice of Fire. I haven't seen a deck so far that should only play 2. The Phoenix Flames are so strong. And the weapon. So because of that, the number of blues you actually want to play in Fire is maybe a little bit higher than you'd think. So I'm generally looking like sort of like 7 to even 9 blues in my Fire deck, depending on the strength of them. And then yellows are actually the least relevant, because yellow doesn't, so it might let you swing like weapon, but it doesn't let you go a 1-cost attack like the is it Dust Runner? Is what it's called? No, the league tap effective, the 1 for 4 with go again at red, then into weapon, then into like a Phoenix Flame, plus maybe a 0-cost like a Lava Burst, Rupture on the end of the chain. So those are kind of the main things for me in Fai.
All right, finally, Dromai, right? So the hardest one to make work in Sealed, I believe, and it seems that the World Premiere did follow suit from that, did represent that. I still think, level 0, right, we're looking for dragons. Dragons are very powerful. We can get them out on the battlefield. There's some that stand above the rest, definitely, and Hayden, you can speak to a few of those. But I'm looking for dragons. I'm looking for red density. I need reds that have go again so I can give my dragons go again as well later down on that combat chain. I need ways to create and utilize Ash. That's really important. You can create all the Ash in the world, but if you can't utilize it, it's not very good. And then finally, Senpais, baby, or if it's Senpai or whatever it is. Those Phantasm, the 1 for 5, basically Spears of Surreality that makes an Ash if it's broken, and then the Enigma Chimera, that's 2 for 8. Those cards are ridiculous. So in a draft pool, I know we're going to pre-release, we're going to be playing Seal, but that should give you an idea. The average amount of 6 poppers in a draft pool is actually less than 1 statistically. I got this from someone else. I'm going to trust it because it's a trustworthy source. But you shouldn't expect a lot of poppers, and 2 for 8 and 1 for 5 with go again is really going to grind your opponent out. It's hard to deal with, and I think those cards are an absolute premium. If I get a bunch of those in my pool, I'm definitely playing Dromai because those cards are powerful.
I think you mean average less than 1 per player, right?
Yes, average less than 1 per player.
There's a few. There's at least a few in your flex and stuff. So there is ways to create 6 attacks. But yeah, I agree. I think so. Like you say, the hardest thing about Dromai is that you have to do a number of things. You have to find a way to efficiently use your resources, and because your resources are primarily red in the deck, because you're trying to create ash, that becomes more difficult. So sequencing and finding the right turn to actually pitch a red versus pitch a blue or a yellow, for instance, can be quite difficult. So things that also I guess make ash on the side, or ways to transform ash are the key things. So Rake the Embers is like the most important card, I think, in Fire. This is one of the cards I'm looking for to open first. And then I'm actually going to lay out on the side, I'm going to lay out, okay, what cards make ash, and then I'm going to lay out next to them what cards can transform ash. How many of these ways do I have? And then I'm looking for like a few win conditions. So like you say, the Center Pies, these big attacks, yeah, they're good, but I'm also looking for some of these sticky permanents on the board, these ways to maybe like make multiple Aether Ashwing in a turn, make a dragon or two. I want to have like a kind of a handful of these overall, so maybe like 6 or 7 of these in total across the Center Pies, and the ways to really use ash aggressively and efficiently. And then actually the other thing I'm really looking for in Dromai, in this kind of seal format in particular, but also in limited, in draft, is like, how can I slow the game down? Like one of the hardest things to do is Beat Fai. And so there's like a lot of these defensive cards like Oasis, Respite, and the Sigil that are going to help me, because I can picture a red card to play one of these, get an ash, and I can slow a turn cycle down, maybe take a turn cycle, end up with a few ash after the turn cycle, and then utilize that on a future turn, because you need to get a hit on board somehow. And first of all, step 1 is creating ash, step 2 is transforming ash, and step 3 is utilizing your board state to actually push damage.
All right, Hayden, let's talk a little bit about the format in general. First thing I want to mention is speed. Does the second cycle exist? You tried to predict this back in your early Uprising sort of theories. Did it come true? Is second cycle a thing here?
Good question. I'm not sure. I think it might be. So I don't. I think the tough thing is we saw Fire really dominate in the world premiere. I think one of the things I went back out to afterwards is built up a few pools with Dromai and had a look. And I think Dromai can actually really slow the format down. I also think even in my Fire mirrors, people were just trying to race. They were like, oh, I just have to hope I have more damage. And I think that's like a real losing proposition, a really hard thing to do. I think instead what you're trying to look to do is actually go back to a little bit of basics and win turn cycles. People were really underestimating the power of the defensive cards in this format. And so I guess to answer the question, I think it can be. It's really going to depend on the game and on the deck that you have and what tools you have available to you. But I wouldn't be surprised, especially where Dromai is concerned, to see second cycle start to come into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so defending being, actually important. It sounds probably not like a novel idea, but I think maybe back in Tales of Aria it was happening a bit less. So trading damage, winning turn cycles, very much a callback to Welcome to Race Seal if you were able to play that format. So yeah, slow the game down and value trade with your opponent. All right, Hayden, so Arcane Barrier and Quell, how important is it for me to have that and specifically utilize it? There's a lot of ways to sort of use resources on your opponent's turn, even outside of Quell. You have things like Brothers in Arms. Of course, if you're Iyslander, you have all of her abilities. How important is it for me to have, that one piece of Arcane Barrier against something like an Iyslander, or just Quell in general, and then expand a little bit more past that onto cards, maybe sideboard cards, things like Oasis or Spite, particularly against things like Iyslander.
Defensive efficiency is really important in this format. So having cards like Arcane Barrier and Quell are actually huge, because you have a lot of cards that also work alongside that. You've just named a couple of them: Oasis, Respite, the Sigil, the Quell weapon, the Quell equipment just in general. Brothers in Arms, Flex for, maybe popping Center Pies, whatever it might be. There is these cards that defensively have resource costs, and actually using resource in your opponent's turn can be really important. Dromai, for instance, uses it to create ash. So that's it. You pitch 1 red to play an Oasis Respite. You can be, it could be 7 damage worth of stuff you've got going on there. Sorry, 5 damage plus you get an ash. So it depends what you rate the ashes, but with a blue it could be 7 damage. The one thing I think with like these kind of pieces of equipment is I will look at my pools, and if they're kind of close in power level in terms of what I think I do, the equipment's really going to massively sway me. I would probably weight like the equipment I have to me maybe 20% of the importance of what I've got going on with my pool. So if my 2 sort of like heroes are pretty close, I'm going to go with the one that has the stronger equipment, the access to 2 Quell, or the access to a piece of Arcane Barrier plus Quell, because Arcane Barrier is going to do a lot of work. And Iyslander often with the play patterns wants to like play a threat and then weapon you, play something out of arsenal that might have some incidental damage and disrupt you, play activate the weapon on your turn. So you're often going to be able to get a lot of value out of the Arcane Barrier, and actually to be able to win these games against good Iyslander pools and players who kind of know what they're doing and how to play turn cycles, you really do need access to this. So if you flip no Quell or one Quell and no Arcane Barrier, you're going to really struggle, and they can look at that immediately and start to play into that as well. So yeah, the equipment is all said and done really important.
Yeah. So last thing here is that I want to talk about, especially with the Draconic heroes, your resource curve. I think that, playing a Draconic hero, red line matters. You're going to think, I want to put in all my red cards. I want to be cutting these blue cards and just getting the damage. But blue cards are very important because you have things like Quell, because you can utilize these additional resources, playing things like Oasis or Spite, and even things like Fai. They're decently resource intensive. You're going to want to swing. You're going to want to swing that blade every time. You need something to come before. Often might be a one cost. So you're going to need a blue on your turn. Dromai, sort of the same thing follows. So I think that you are going to need more blues than you expect. Hayden, you talked about that 6 to 7, have some yellows in between, but I wouldn't be going down to, like 3 or 4 blues or anything like that in Fai. I think you're probably going to have a bad time if you're doing that.
The weapon. Oh, it's just down to the weapon. The weapon is so good. It's one of the best things that you have playing Fire. So you want to be able to support it is the main thing. And you have the number of these like 1 cost attacks and 2 cost attacks. That's actually the reason that the Sash of Sandakai is like so good, is that on any given turn, you might be like 0 cost with Go Again, weapon, Phoenix Flame from Arsenal, maybe you return another Phoenix Flame, Rupture card. But one of the other like really powerful things you have is these 2 costs. So there's like the Flame Caller, not Flame Caller, the Flame Wave, the one that like flips a card off the top, and if it's less than chain links, you can play it. Like that card's really, that effectively says draw on hit draw cards, like a snatch, right? So your resources are pretty important in Fire. So like you say, I'm not dropping below sort of that, and definitely like 6 or so is you're starting to get low.
Yeah, so that's kind of the resource space you want to have in Fire. But what about Dromai and Iyslander, Hayden?
Iyslander, I think, is pretty straightforward. You want a good, healthy number of blues. So I think I was looking, people had all sorts of varying from sort of like 10 to 16 blues. I mean, it's a little bit like Guardian, I think, in that way. If you think about it from other sets, I'm looking for around like 12 to 14 blues, I think. And I want to have some impactful blues that are going to be good to play out of Arsenal. When it comes to Dromai, this is the toughest one. I mean, you want to use reds as resources some turns, but some turns you want to be able to pay for cards and be able to do powerful things. And that's actually the balance. That's what I found people were struggling to do, is understand when to use the resources and when not. So I'm looking around the same as like 5, maybe a little bit less, like 6 to 7 blues, depending on what the deck that you've got in front of you is, how many, your resource cost base, what I need to pay for.
All right, Hayden. And the question on everybody's mind is, how do you beat Fai? So Fai is probably going to be the most popular deck at your pre-release. Should you force it? I don't think so. I think if you do it, it's probably one of the easier decks, right? It's just a linear aggressive deck, punishes people that are trying to be cute with, maybe the cards they're putting into their list. And yeah, it's just overall, it's generally powerful. I don't know if it's the most powerful. Hayden, let's talk about how to beat it. What's the best way to attack Fai? What's the best way to sort of shut down your opponents that are trying to play that deck against you?
Just play super efficiently and understand where their damage is coming from. So I think one of the things I was finding at the World Premiere, like I said, I don't think my deck had the most amount of damage, but against my other opponents' Fai decks, but they were just purely trying to race, and they were taking damage for no reason. Basically, step 1 is like try and win the turn cycle, right? Is understand like what is actually the most damage I can get out of this hand, both on defense and offense. That's always level 1, and I think people forget it sometimes in a really aggressive format. And then the second one is like, okay, what can I actually do to my deck to be able to soak up really important breakpoints? So there is a few on-hit effects on Fai, and there's things like that. And you don't want to be defensive through the whole game. That's going to really punish you. But say you're playing like Iyslander is a really good way to target it because of the on-hit effects and the disruption effects if you have them, and trying to understand, okay, like what that my Fai opponent's probably going to do. If on your turn you come in with a threat, say it's an arcane damage, and then they kind of do nothing, they just take it. Well, they're probably trying to play a 5-card hand here. Me giving them 1 or 2 frostbites, how disruptive might that be? It could be very disruptive. So that's a good way to maybe, okay, now I've found a card in Arsenal they want to put in, plus I can, maybe it's like it freezes a card in Arsenal or something. It's a cold snap. Like these kind of cards are really important. Try and disrupt them, or try and maybe, you pop your helm on a turn where you think they're kind of set up with a good 5-card hand. These are the sort of things you're looking to try and do to target Fai. And then from like maybe a Dromai perspective, it is using these defensive cards really well. So picking the right turns to Quell, where you're going to get full value out of your Quell. It is finding the turns with like Oasis Respite. The Sigil of Protection is really good against Fai, I think, because they can't really come in with like a 1 or 2 damage attack on the start of the chain. They need something that has Go Again, and these traditionally have like minimum 3 attack, especially the red ones. Maybe they have a yellow 2 attack, but you can defend that out with a card, and then their next threat has 3 if it's the weapon or whatever. So trying to use some of these defensive cards. I really liked one of my strategies on the play. If I was going first against fires, was like I would bring in my sigils of protection, try and land one on turn 1, and that's already me starting at extra life effectively. So these are the kind of things that I'm looking to do, and just some combination of good defensive cards, but you need threats as well. You need to be able to put pressure on them. Things in Dromai like the Centipires to actually just present damage is really good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, everyone, we hope you enjoyed this video. Good luck at your upcoming Uprising pre-release, and we look forward to draft and the Road to Nationals season. Interested to see what the statistics look like after this weekend. World Premiere, we saw a lot of Fai, but I think people are, they've seen all the cards. They have had time to think. We're going to see a lot more Iyslander, a lot more Dromai out there. Anyway, until next time, we'll see you on the next video.
See you later.